Hi, I'm Christine, a middle and high school STEM teacher and co-founder of Floop, a company dedicated to helping teachers close the feedback loop. I'm passionate about helping teachers find ways to create an education system that meets the needs of all learners and gives students agency over their own learning. I'm excited to share with you 3 research-based strategies for giving feedback that works. Before we get started, you'll want to pause and grab whatever you need to be able to take some notes. First, think for a moment and write down your definition of feedback as it relates to education. To design a feedback system that actually works in your classroom, it's important to start with a strong definition of feedback. In 2017, Floop interviewed a group of secondary teachers, and a common theme appeared in the way they defined feedback. As one teacher put it, feedback is info on how to improve. It tells students what they need to do to get where they need to be. Though this definition isn't wrong, it is limiting. Instead, we like the definition of feedback used by education researchers like Henderson, who in 2018 defined feedback as the process in which learners make sense of information about their performance and use it to enhance the quality of their work or learning strategies. Notice how this definition puts the focus on students more than the teacher, and it describes feedback as an ongoing, back-and-forth process. When we use this more robust definition of feedback, we can start to understand why feedback is so powerful. Researchers in Australia looked at hundreds of studies about the way students learn. They found that feedback is the #1 driver of student learning. Soon after, other researchers in the United Kingdom found that simply getting feedback isn't enough to produce meaningful outcomes for students. Those students also need to learn how to understand that feedback and use it to improve their learning. The strategies we'll go over today will help you build this powerful feedback system in a way that will support transformational changes to student learning and to student agency. Take a moment to reflect. For you, what is the hardest part of building an effective feedback system? For me, the hardest part of designing an effective feedback system in my classroom was getting students to engage with the feedback I gave them. So, let's start with strategies for teaching feedback literacy. Feedback literacy was a term first coined by UK researcher Paul Sutton in 2012. It has since evolved to refer to a set of skills that help students get the feedback they need, understand that feedback, and use that feedback to learn. The term feedback literacy is relatively new. We've known of the importance of learning these feedback skills for quite a while. Hattie and Timperley, in 2007, in their seminal work, The Power of Feedback, point out that the feedback process requires skill on the part of both the student and the teacher in order to be effective. Research into the development of feedback literacy has revealed a number of strategies that are effective for building students' capacity to seek, understand, and use feedback to learn. Here are 3 of those strategies. First, you can work on setting students up to be emotionally open to feedback, and you can do this by first modeling it yourself. By seeking feedback from your students and then processing it publicly and showing them how you use that feedback to inform your own pedagogy, your students will in turn be more open to seeking feedback themselves. I like to do this using Google Forms, where I ask my students questions about my teaching and collect their responses, and then I display that feedback data in class and we talk through possible improvements together. My students love that they get to give me teaching advice and that I actually use their advice. Next, you can teach feedback processing strategies by providing routines, protocols, and systems for processing student feedback. By doing this, you teach your students how to make sense of their feedback once it comes. I like to ask questions in my feedback to students and give time in class for my students to respond. I've also seen teachers use strategies like feedback portfolios, color coding, and feedback journaling with great success. Finally, you can encourage students to use their feedback by incentivizing iteration. Think for a minute about your assessment and grading system. How could you redesign pieces of that system to reward iteration and growth? I like to delay grading until at least one round of feedback and iteration has been completed, and then I have my students assign themselves a grade based on their feedback. I also allow resubmits on completed work if students are dissatisfied with their progress. So let's take a moment to process those strategies. Write down one of these strategies for teaching feedback literacy that you can start using today. Next up, we'll look at ways to make your feedback more actionable. For feedback to be actionable, it must be accessible, timely, and relevant. Students need to know how to access the feedback, both logistically and cognitively. They need to receive it at a time when they have somewhere immediate to apply it, and the feedback needs to relate to the learning goals. To support students in cognitively accessing their feedback, they need to learn to interpret what the feedback is asking them to change or improve. I find that it helps for students to experience being on the giving side of the feedback process. Both peer feedback and self-feedback activities help students develop a deeper understanding of assessment criteria and a sense of agency over the feedback process. To be effective, peer review and self-assessment processes need direct instruction and they need scaffolding. I recommend focusing your first few peer review sessions around a single criteria, which is hard, and using worked examples to teach students how to engage with assessment criteria. For feedback to be actionable, students need a place to apply the feedback that comes in time for the feedback to be meaningful. Here are 3 ways that you can structure your lessons to provide immediate places for students to apply their feedback. Assignment sprints are when 3 or more assignments happen in quick succession and are focused on the same goals and criteria each time. Micro assignments are a way of breaking down big projects into a series of checkpoints that then piece back together to become a more complex assignment. And finally, again, we encourage you to consider a revision policy that allows students to improve their work in response to feedback and that they can resubmit their work for full credit. To improve the relevance of feedback to student learning, I find that it's important to align your feedback with the learning goals. Whether you choose to use a rubric, spot annotation, or narrative feedback structure, you'll want to make sure the feedback stays on target with the learning goals. A quick way to stay focused on the goals of the assignment is to develop a feedback template or a comment bank ahead of time, and then use that when you're constructing your feedback for your students. Another strategy would be to curate resources for common misconceptions or learning needs ahead of time. And then when you're giving feedback, you can point your students towards relevant next steps right alongside your feedback. Okay, so let's take a moment to process those strategies. Write down one of these strategies for providing actionable feedback that you can start using today. We know that incorporating more effective feedback practices into your classroom can feel overwhelming. And so the third strategy is to find a sustainable system that works for you. Educational technology industry right now is saturated with products that claim to save you time and improve student learning. And many of those products are focused on helping teachers give faster feedback, but often that's at the expense of feedback effectiveness. Whether you're using one of these tech products or building your system from paper and pen, ask yourself these questions to make sure it will really deliver the learning outcomes our students deserve. Ask yourself, is this system sustainable throughout the year? Can I use it all year without burning out? Ask yourself, is this system flexible enough to work in my existing classroom? You shouldn't have to rebuild all of your lessons in order to use a platform. Ask yourself, does this system help my students develop feedback literacy? We know from the research that students who do not have a feedback literacy are not going to be using feedback to effectively improve their learning outcomes, and whatever system you develop should teach those skills. Finally, ask yourself, does this system help my students develop agency over their learning? The ultimate goal is that our students will graduate ready to take these skills into their career or their life beyond school. They need to know how to seek out feedback, understand that feedback, and use it to improve their work or learn. And your feedback system should help them develop the agency to do that. Floop is a company of classroom teachers and educators who understand this difficulty of designing an effective feedback system. We ourselves experienced firsthand how the practice of commenting on student work felt unsustainable and ineffective. We would spend days writing feedback to our students, and then they'd just throw it away without knowing how to use it. So in 2016, we started developing a time-saving app and a curriculum for teaching feedback literacy. We'd love for you to check it out and see if it can help you develop an effective and sustainable feedback system to use in your classroom today. Check it out at floopedu.com. And here's a sneak peek.
When students are stuck or have completed their assignments, they can submit their work through Floop. I can see my students' work as soon as it's been submitted. I can add comments, questions, and next steps. When I see similar student mistakes, I can drag and drop previous comments. From there, the feedback is sent instantly to my students, and we can continue the conversations in Floop or in person. Students can revise and resubmit their work, helping them grow from feedback. Floop also helps me run a peer review on any assignment. The peer review is anonymous for students, so students won't know whose work they're seeing, and they won't know who gave them feedback. Students can view and give feedback on 5 work samples in just half a class period. The process is scaffolded to build their feedback literacy skills. And I get a summary of the peer review as it happens. Lastly, students can assess themselves, giving them agency over their own learning. Join the feedback movement today at floopedu.com.